Welcome back to another episode of Rock Boys Football Dill. Late Sunday night, Josh Pate coming out with a spicy top 20 rankings post-spring heading into 2025. And I want to start this off with massive fan of Josh Pate, been a massive fan of Josh Pate, listened to a lot of Josh Pate. This is not like us getting up here and just throwing away his rankings. I think it's more like, that there are some hot takes in these rankings and some intriguing conversations to have around some of these football teams. Really fired up to get into this one now. Before we do, and as always, look, I've been on Twitter all morning. It is a battlefield. And Josh Pate's replies. Would love to hear some of your takes in the comment section. Appreciate you guys rocking with it. If y'all do enjoy the content, consider subscribing to the channel. Dill, without further ado, let's get into it. I think you got to start with Bama at 4. Like, here's my surface level analysis here. Bama's a team I got question marks about going into 2025. There are a lot of other teams that are below Alabama in these rankings that I feel like you know a little bit more about. I guess my question is, did Alabama answer enough questions in the offseason to warrant a top 4 spot in these rankings going into 2025?
And honestly, the only way I could justify that high of a position, because I see the consensus kind of 8 to 12, I feel like, for Bam, and that's frankly where I see him probably around 1. The one big glaring one for me is the defensive line. Like, is that unit going to take a step? Because they were not particularly good last year. It was something that you could like set your watch to under Nick Saban, that they'd be really, really good and they'd be able to dominate there. They weren't that way. And you lose some pretty good players. Like Robinson was their best pass rusher last year. You lose a couple guys on the inside like Tim Smith. And I know you got some guys coming back. Like I like Keenan, I like Overton, but are either of those guys like real difference makers? And are you going to get that year 2 step or year 3? I guess now for that group of guys like the Anza Pierce, the Rousseaus,
Keon Keely. Yeah. Well, here's the conversation. They didn't really go to the portal to go hammer that position. And so it's like maybe there's some internal confidence that these guys kind of play to what we thought these guys were going to be coming out of high school. Quarterback, I think, again, like a lot of these other teams, you feel decent about quarterback. And I'm not saying I feel bad about what the quarterback play is going to be. And one of the things you can make the argument is, look, I'm not one of those guys that gets up there and acts like Jalen Milroe sucked, because I don't think that's the case. Now, it was a little bit more of a roller coaster than you wanted that thing to be at the quarterback spot, but he was a difference maker in a lot of those football games for Bama. Maybe the Ryan Grubb coming in, massive storyline here, and Kalen DeBoer getting a quarterback that probably fits a little bit in terms of what he wants to do on offense, I think could be a storyline, because the talent is going to be around the quarterback spot.
And that's true. So, like, you think, could you run something a little closer to what they did at Washington where they had that offense humming? So, again, that's certainly an answer there. But you kind of said it. I just look at a team like a Notre Dame or even an LSU and Oregon. Like, those teams, I just feel like have a lot more maybe high-end difference makers at some of those key positions, like the defensive line and maybe in the offensive line as well. Like those places where you do kind of have some questions about Alabama. Again, are you giving a little bit of that like Kalen DeBoer, now it's his show, if you will? And is that like a good thing? Like Nick Saban wasn't exactly a bad coach there. It's not like further you get away from Nick Saban make things better for Alabama.
That's how I would sum it up, is like, I feel like we're giving Alabama the Nick Saban bump and kind of overlook, like, look, in years past, you would overlook some problems with this Alabama team because it's like, hey, I got some blind confidence that Nick Saban is going to maximize the roster that he has. Should we be giving that to Kalen DeBoer's? Probably a fair question.
Should we be doing that? Yeah.
Here's another.
I don't think Kalen DeBoer is pushing this Bama program in the wrong direction. You look at how they recruit and what they're kind of doing. Being able to keep their guys on the roster, because that's the one big thing. Like, you keep around some really good players from going into the draft. But I still look, there's probably more questions, and there's some really good teams I feel like that he has lower than Alabama.
And then it's kind of the opposite, where it's like, hey, look, I have question marks about Georgia's roster. And we were talking about, hey, should we put Georgia or Florida ahead of our – we both kind of had a consensus of like, let's give Georgia the nod because of Kirby Smart. We don't have the Kirby Smart bump in these rankings. Georgia coming in at 11. Another team that you have some question marks about, I think one that starts at quarterback with Gunnar Stockton. my biggest question is, like, can we get back to running the football like we're used to seeing from Georgia, where you lose some legitimate offensive linemen to the NFL draft, weren't exactly good up front last year, specifically running the football. I look at Gunnar Stockton as a quarterback that probably you want to give him a run game to maximize what this dude can be in 2025. Can Georgia do that? That's a question. But Dill, I look at Georgia and say, I feel like there's some players on this roster that you feel pretty good about, and they addressed in a big time way the position group that kind of held them back last year, which was the pass catchers. Georgia at 11 seems low, just based on my take of you don't make a lot of money betting against Kirby Smart.
And you still have the machine rolling. It's like, again, I don't think last year was a great year, but they also did like win the SEC championship. So it's like,
and
again, they were still pretty much a top 5 team last year. They still have everything in place that was making them so good. So to put them that low is, I'm kind of with you. It's a bit of a head scratcher to me because like they deserve the benefit of the doubt until Kirby Smart gives me a reason.
That's probably like the take I have with where Alabama and Georgia are at, is like we're giving Alabama the benefit of the doubt and not really giving it to Georgia at 11. Dill, I thought I was the lowest on Ohio State. Josh Pate gets up there Sunday night, hold my beer, like number 8. Look, I get why Ohio State's not in his top 3, even top 5, because it's just you're replacing a lot, and it's not just personnel. It's at the coordinator spot too. You got a new quarterback coming in. There's just too many high-level difference makers, at least in my opinion. And even though I have plenty of question marks about Ohio State, when you have someone like Jeremiah Smith, Carnell Tate, Mylan Graham, Brandon Innes, potentially Quincy Porter, Caleb Downs on the defensive side of the football, at least the way I look at it, it's like when you have that many high-level difference makers, it's hard for me to not put Ohio State at least in my top 6.
And I saw an Ohio State fan, I think in Josh Pate's comments, tweet something like, well, they haven't been outside the top 7 since Urban Meyer took over. And it's a very similar thing to like Georgia. Like until Ohio State proves they can't just reload the clip and be top 5 pretty much every year, it's really hard to keep them out, especially I look at a team like Penn State. It's like Penn State really hasn't been able to get over the Ohio State hump in forever. And I feel like Penn State's getting huge benefit of the doubt. And I know they return a lot of really good players, but I still kind of want to see Penn State go out there and win a big game. Because
I got question marks about Penn State at 3.
They still don't have the difference makers on the outside. I don't feel like I like the Trebor Pena addition, but they don't really have a boundary guy who scares me. You're not sure they're going to be able to replace that tight end spot. I got my question about Penn State.
Okay, too. Tyler Warren's a massive question mark. I agree. I don't think there's a team around the country that relied on a player more than Penn State did with Tyler Warren on offense. My bigger question for Penn State, Coach Koldenicki, elite run game, very good quarterback in Drew. I think they did upgrade the pass catchers, at least in the wide receiver room. I don't really have that many question marks about their offense. I think their offense is going to be pretty dang good. My concerns on the defensive side of the football for 2 different reasons. You replace really, really good football player in Abdul Carter, who was the, straight up engine of that defense. The other sneaky storyline is Jim Knowles. It's not historically not been a super smooth transition. And so I look at Penn State and say and it's kind of funny because I feel like everybody, when you talk Penn State, you focus on the things you love, which there are a lot of things you like. We're kind of ignoring that big question mark of, hey, we've historically seen Penn State have, top 5 at the worst top 10 defense. Are we going to see that in the 2025 year?
I'll push back for the Penn State fans against what I think is I get the idea, but also I think when Jim Knowles took over at the other spots, Oklahoma State and Ohio State, especially,
this is fair.
They were taking over gutter fests of defenses. Like Ohio State, Kerry Combs was not even close to where they needed to be on defense. It didn't really Jim Knowles was taking over a poorly coached unit, and I think ditto at Oklahoma State. Penn State, I mean, they've been really well coached on the defense side of the ball for years now. Tom Allen is a really good DC, so I don't think the drop off should be huge because I do think this is again, and you got your questions of how they're going to replace some of the defensive linemen. That's probably where I'm looking. Like, are they deep enough? Are they good enough up there to be as disruptive as they were last year? But it's really hard for me to doubt Penn State's defense because I do think they have been a very well coached unit under
Yeah, that's fair. And it's like the personnel is not as bad. Like you lose Abdul Carter, you still got some dogs. No doubt about it. So Clemson won. I'll just give my quick take. We had Clemson too, so it's not like we're disagreeing here. If you said, hey, if all these teams were going to play tomorrow, what team you want to trust the most? It's probably Clemson coming in at 1. Now, I think the question that Clemson fans probably want to answer is there's like 0 question marks you have about Clemson from a roster standpoint right now. The question probably is, are they going to be the best team in January? Because there are some other teams that have some ceilings that we're not necessarily sure what they look like. Texas at 2 we like. LSU believers in. Notre Dame a little bit low, but I don't really want to get into that a ton unless you do.
And it's pretty much for very similar reasons to like Clemson probably is like you look, there's so much that you feel really good about coming back. And then I look, probably what pushes them into a higher stratosphere to me is I think their boundary play and their playmakers on the outside are much better than we've seen at Notre Dame for a long time. So like the things you loved about Notre Dame, I still think you really like about Notre Dame. But I do think they have a higher ceiling because CJ Carr's an interesting quarterback that I don't think they've had in a little bit. And also their boundary wideouts are better.
They haven't had a quarterback with the arm talent that, because I was looking at it today, actually. They haven't had a quarterback with the arm talent that CJ Carr has, I should say, in a long. I would just flip-flop Penn State and Notre Dame at this point. Because I look at Notre Dame and say Notre Dame beat them in the playoffs. I think got better this offseason, especially addressing the positions of concern at wide receiver. And then the big question is CJ Carr. Like, is CJ Carr going to be that guy? And if you think he is, I'll say this. If CJ Carr is that guy to elevate this Notre Dame offense, they're off to the races. They're one of the best teams in the country. Oregon at 7, a little bit low for my liking, but I can see it replacing a lot. Florida, we agree with. The boys and Josh Pate buying stock in the Florida Gators. They'll Oklahoma at 10. Interesting reasoning, right? It was, hey, I'm a believer in John Mateer and I'm a believer in Ben Arbuckle, which is the reason to believe in Oklahoma. Look, this defense is going to be very good, especially with Brent Venables calling the plays. Is the offense going to be good enough?
Yeah, I think that's fair because you talk about a team that did maybe the most to address their deficiency. Oklahoma, yes. They took their swing. Now, there's not that much they can do to rebuild that offensive line. Like,
that's the question.
You just have your inherent limits and how well you can rebuild that through the portal and in one offseason. I mean, you bring in a really talented true freshman. I think a lot of us are interested to see if he can possibly be an answer there in Michael Fasusi. But I'm kind of with, look, are they going to be good enough at the tackle spot? I think the interior, they're going to be fine and they're going to be able to get by. The tackle spot is my big question because if you are really deficient there, and I'm not going to say Oklahoma is that, but I think there's a risk that they might be that.
Well, they were last year, and they didn't do a ton. I mean, you're putting stock in an FCS transfer in Derek Simmons. You're putting stock in a potentially true freshman in Mike Fasusi. You have some guys. That's my question. And Dill, look, we're going to figure out how good Oklahoma is going to be week 2. Michigan comes to town. If they block up Michigan week 2 and win that football game, Oklahoma all of a sudden turns into a bona fide contender in this conference. But if they don't, which could be a concern, and they look like they're not much improved with the offensive line, you could be looking at 6 and 6, 7. Probably a little bit better.
I still think even at the worst, they're kind of in the 15 to 18 range, like at the worst. Because I look, John Mateer is just too good. John Mateer is awesome to me. So I'm okay with having them 10. I think that's really putting your stake in the ground that, they're going to fix their offensive line issues, which I'm not. I don't know that I'm totally ready to go there, but they took their swing to make themselves better in a certain way to push themselves where I think you can make an argument for 10.
I'll ask you this. How good do you think Oklahoma can be? How high if I told you this, and I'm a genie, said, hey, Oklahoma's offensive line is going to be solid.
If Michael Fasusi is
regardless of Michael Fasusi, regardless of if I just told you this, whether it's Shake Sexton, Jake Taylor, whoever it is, and I said this, they'll be a solid offensive line. I'm not going to tell you they're going to be elite because I don't think they're going to be elite. But if I told you it's not going to be a liability like it was in the 2024 year, how high can Oklahoma climb this year in the college football landscape?
Yeah, their ceiling's high, and I'm not sure their wide receiver play is going to be good enough to push them into that top 5. But they're probably.
I thought you were like a Deion Burks guy. What happened with the Deion Burks?
What else is there? I guess
Devontae Gibson had a very good spring. Isaiah
And
Satania
we'll
had a good
see. Like,
spring.
obviously, that's a big jump for him from Arkansas Pine Bluff. But
Agreed.
I don't know.
Okay.
They can be a top 10 team easily. I'm not sure
Yeah,
they're
I agree.
quite top 5 at the
Yeah.
ceiling.
I don't
But
know. I think the ceiling's really high. If you told me the
because I
offensive
almost
line's
am
solid.
like, what am I saying? Like, everybody's ceiling could be really high. I could talk myself into almost anything, but I don't know that right now I'd look at their ceiling as a championship
Talking
team.
about a team I could talk myself into, the Miami Hurricanes. Like if they have fixed the stuff on the defense, which from a personnel standpoint they have, and Carson Beck coming in with a good offensive line, maybe some question marks about pass catchers. I like where Miami's at 12.
Another
Arizona
team that
State,
I think like swung their sword and tried to fix their issues in a
and they
very
did
aggressive way.
from a personnel standpoint on paper, they
And
did.
coaching staff standpoint. So
Yes.
again, you like what Miami did. You still got to probably see it though. So I'm okay with them at 12. I think it's maybe a little low, but I'm okay with it.
Yeah, I think we had them at 10. Arizona State, Texas A&M, Illinois. I think Ole Miss at 16
Felt high.
felt a little bit high, but and he talked about it's like Ole Miss kind of a tricky team to evaluate, man. Here's my take on Ole Miss is I'll tell you this, even if Austin Simmons is a 1-for-1 replacement of Jackson Dart, which is obviously a very big if. We're talking about Dart that just went in the first round of the NFL draft. I just don't see that defense running it back in as dominant fashion. Nobody talked about it. Everybody wanted to talk about Jackson Dart, probably because he's a good-looking young man, Lane Kiffin on offense. Dill, that defense was one of the best in the country.
Line. That defensive line
Yes.
when they were on was a real game wrecking
And
unit. That's just I'm not sure you're going to get that again because they really got that mostly through the portal.
You
had some
lose
development, but
you lose a lot of those NFL dudes, and it just didn't feel like the portal additions this cycle are as impactful as they were
no, I
12
will
months
say
ago.
there's some interesting young guys like a Jeffrey Rush, a Cam Franklin. So there are some potential
Nichols.
answers, but I'm not sure. I'm not sure there's enough numbers, let's say, to be as high of likelihood as it hitting maybe as you kind of had last year, where you knew you were getting really good players and guys like Princely and obviously Walter Nolan.
High on Georgia Tech. Very gettable schedule for Georgia Tech, too. That's a team to certainly, especially in like the ACC landscape, very gettable ACC schedule. You could see us talking Georgia Tech ACC championship game spot on the line in
Score a
November.
lot of points. I know that. I'm not sure their defense can be deadly, but
I would throw South. Look, I a little low on South Carolina, in my opinion, with the upside you have with Lenore Sellers. You have question marks about the defense, very similar to Georgia Tech. I just think I have a little bit more confidence in what Lenore Sellers can do at the quarterback spot.
and you do have some real monsters on that South Carolina defense. Like Dylan Stewart's a guy who's very single-handedly can put his fingerprints on a game in a big-time way. So I think very similar offensively potentially for Georgia Tech and South Carolina. I just look at the ability that South Carolina has to replace their losses in the defense far outweighs, I feel like, Georgia Tech, let's say.
Michigan at 19, hating on the boys. And I'm going to take off my maize and blue color glasses to discuss Michigan. I still think he's low on Michigan. Look, the way Michigan was playing in November, like after that Oregon game, boat race Northwestern, that's what it is. Really impressive defensive performance against Ohio State. Did it again against Alabama in the bowl game. I get on, and look, this is where, from a Josh Pace perspective, I get it on paper. You lose Mason Graham, Kenneth Grant, Will Johnson, who didn't play, but you lose them. Oh, this defense might take a step back. Dill, year 2 Wink Martindale, deeper defense, maybe not as top heavy, significantly deeper defense than we saw last year. I feel like Michigan, just from the defensive side of the football, sets a pretty high floor as a top 15 team. And then the conversation is, all right, if we're talking about Michigan in the college football playoffs or competing for a Big Ten championship, it's how good Bryce is. In my opinion, it's good. Dill, as a Michigan fan that watched every single game multiple times from last year, it can't get worse. It can't get worse on offense than what it was last year from the quarterback play. I guess the question,
in fairness, if they're going to be much higher than 19, it needs to get a good bit better to an extent, I think. So
yeah, I agreed.
I get the idea because you are putting a ton of stock in a true freshman. Because the talent around, I mean, the running back and I think the offensive line play should be better. Running back will, of course, be better. Offensive line, I think a lot of us have some confidence that takes a step. Wide receiver play is still going to have, you're going to need really good play from the quarterback spot because that's no Alabama wide receiver core, let's say.
Yeah, that's probably the best way to frame it is like Bryce has to be a legitimate difference maker.
Wait, Ty Simpson doesn't need to be awesome for Alabama.
Yeah,
He just needs to do his thing. Ryan Williams can obviously pick up some slack, Bernard and some of those other young guys. Bryce Underwood's going to need to be really good for Michigan to be able to move the ball through the air particularly well.
I would probably agree with that. And then it's like, look, is Bryce Underwood that dude year one? And if he is, then we're talking about Michigan as a top 10 team, top 8 team competing at the highest level. I can see like, hey, just temper a little bit with the true freshman quarterback. Texas Tech at 20. I think that's almost exactly where we had Texas Tech.
I almost think Texas Tech's a little low because that team just talent-wise is low.
Like, but I also like
clear best team in the Big 12, I think.
On paper.
I maybe shouldn't say that because
no, I agree. No, I on paper, I'm taking Texas Tech's roster any day of the week. Now, Arizona State returns the whole coaching staff, returns the whole, pretty much the whole roster from last year, outside of, I believe, Cam Scadaboo is like the only big name. So you have a lot more continuity, which matters in this era of college football. Now, can Texas Tech maximize it? Look, if Texas Tech maximizes this roster, we're having a whole different conversation about them Texas Tech Red Raiders. All right, we'll close it out. Wait, teams that should have been in that were left out, you got any? I got 2. 1, I'll go with mine. I'll give you time to think. USC, and I know you're going to laugh at me. I know you do that every time. You do that every time. USC lost pretty much every game, one-score game last year. They beat Texas A&M in the bowl game, neutral site, beat LSU week 1, neutral site. And I'm not going back and looking at results and saying they should be ranked in the top 10. But I am saying that I feel like people think this USC team was worse than it was last year. Like the record was not great. Those were a lot of close games. I mean, one-score game against Notre Dame. One-score game against Penn State. We're 2-touchdown lead in the fourth quarter, I believe, last year. They just blew a lot of games because they didn't have any depth on the defensive line. Year 2, Danton Lynn, way better, deeper defensive line. I think there's a lot of reason to believe USC. Again, I'm not going to say they're going to win a national championship, but they're going to be a better team than they were in 2024. Any team you want to mention here?
Yeah, I think SMU's going to be pretty good. I think SMU, again, I know they're going to be able, or I am quite confident they're going to be able to score a lot of points. I think they have very similar challenges to maybe what Georgia Tech has, maybe a little bit better at quarterback play. And that's tight because I am a big Haynes King fan, but Kevin Jennings for last year I thought was really, really good. So that's a team that if you're going to include a Georgia Tech or even maybe an Ole Miss, I think SMU's kind of got some similar characteristics where there's some real high-end parts of that team. Certainly some questions.
At the most important position. I think, like, if you were to – I'll sell SMU in 30 seconds. It's like I have more confidence in Kevin Jennings at quarterback than half the quarterbacks that we see on this list. It's probably the best way to sell them SMU Mustangs. All right, we'll close it out there. Sorry for interrupting, stealing your SMU thunder. Appreciate you guys rocking with it. If y'all do enjoy the content, consider subscribing to the channel, and we'll talk to y'all later. Peace.